We were in college, and he spotted me, apparently.
And freaked out. And like, when I saw her, I was like, I immediately knew that was my wife. But she was the first girl I couldn't talk to.
That was back when AOL was the thing. And he asked me in the dorm for my screen name.
And it was just persistence, or maybe she felt sorry for me in the beginning.
Each time I would spend time with him, at first I was like, he's not cute. And then the next time I was like, well, he's kind of cute. He's kind of sweet. And then, like, he's hot. I love this guy.
Said anything and everything the wrong way, and she still, for some reason, fell for me. Dada?
Mama. Happy birthday. I love you, Mom.
I love you. Lulu say love you. Mwah. In 2013, I found myself sitting in office as a missions pastor and truly navigating something by faith, but I literally had no clue what I was doing. But I was eager, I was excited.
It was a big transition. I knew at some point I would be involved in ministry. I just didn't know it would be as a pastor's wife, but I welcomed it because it was kind of a life that I had always seen myself at some point living in some capacity.
We were going to do an outreach that brought the community in. And at the same time, I had a root canal that was needed to be done. And I went to the dentist and got a prescription for painkillers. A couple weeks went by and another stressful situation happened. Scheduled an appointment with my doctor. And I just shared I couldn't organize my thoughts. I couldn't get the task done like I needed to. And I remembered that I used to take Adderall when I was just out of college to help me study and to prepare, and that was like a miracle drug for me. I took one, and then I wanted more, and took more and more and more, until 3 days later, I'd used all of my medication.
Addiction is a way of coping with life when you don't know how to do so relationally. So if you learn at a young age that when I have stress, when I have worry, when I'm sad, when I am fearful, if I use a substance or I use a process to return to joy or to return to hope, it will never have the same effect as a relationship. So it's a way of coping with life, but it's a maladaptive way of coping with life. It will never work.
I can remember as a 10-year-old taking my first pain pill and liking the feeling that I had. And it made me feel, instead of down and like almost lethargic and disconnected, it actually gave me energy, and it made me feel confident in what I was pursuing at the time. I always saw it as something I could stop. Like, I could just use Adderall to get this job done, then I'm good. If I could just use the painkillers to get me off of Adderall, then I'm okay. But I never actually took that first step to try to stop. I just kept putting it off and putting it off.
Addiction actually creates a cycle in the brain, and there are certain neural pathways that are being stimulated and creating large neural networks that then progress over the span of a lifetime, and that's why addiction gets worse with time.
I was exposed to pornography when I was probably about 12 from a neighbor friend of mine. And as soon as I saw it, it wasn't like there was a revulsion or anything. I was completely, immediately addicted to it. And back then there wasn't internet. So pornography was all magazines and books and things like that. So I remember at like 13 going into Walden Books, a bookstore, and having this urge to look at the magazines because I knew they were there. And so I would get like a teen magazine and grab one of the pornography magazines and put it like inside of it. And just doing something and knowing it was so wrong, but feeling like I had no control. And that's really when it all started for me.
On average, that kids first are exposed to pornography is 8. And so it's almost like certain, it's like if they have a friend who has a phone, there's a really good chance that somebody's shared that with them.
And so when something else comes across my path, those kinds of things are stimulating the brain, and the brain goes, oh, well, that felt good. I haven't felt like that before. I think I'll do that again. The brain wants to do what works, right? So addiction isn't necessarily our brain misfiring or working incorrectly. The brain is actually saying, oh, that worked, try that again. And it will keep on working. But what we know about addiction is it never satiates. So the process only causes more of a heightened progression. And that's why we have levels of addiction.
When I was really little, I was very affectionate, very fun-loving, very goofy. And that really all changed when, around 5 years old, my grandfather sexually abused me. About 9 or 10, I was at a neighbor's house. I was locked in a room with the girl and her sister, and they very violently sexually abused me. And I don't remember even anything after it but running home.
Addiction is connected to like undealt with grief, right? You're gonna find almost in every story of addiction, regardless of age, some kind of deficit emotionally that people are trying to deal with, and so they cope with it.
If there's abuse in the situation, not only now is there a void, there's also a lot of emotional pain, and I need distraction from that pain, and this addiction provides me that distraction.
It was summer of 2016 that we got the phone call
that her dad had just went unconscious at her house.
So we loaded up and went to the hospital, and he had passed before we had gotten there. So it was very traumatic for our whole family.
It was in that place where the first thought I had was I didn't want to deal with this pain. And so I called the doctor and asked if I could get her script, and so I got a script for Adderall. We attempted to get my father-in-law's affairs in order, and it's like I'm sitting here going through my father-in-law's stuff of the things that he left behind, meanwhile thinking, what would happen if I died right now? What would I have left my family? I had a picture of my wife sitting, going through all this stuff at my death, and how surprised she would be to know that the man that she fell in love with was trapped. And so I stuffed it. Instead of letting that reality create a change in me, it caused me to want to perform even more. And so the drugs became even more.
Addiction, all it needs is secrecy and shame to build. That's how it grows. And so when we go into an addiction cycle, there's a preoccupation involved, then there's a ritualization, then there's an acting out, then there's a despair. What happens in our culture is when someone is severely addicted to a substance or to sexuality, there is a stigma to it that they're worse than the rest of us. There's something more wrong with them, and we almost pity or we view them as monsters.
Like if somebody comes in and they have a pornography addiction, identifying it as, well, this is wrong and bad first, I mean, all that's gonna do in my mind is reinforce someone's shame. How do you kind of separate out, is it a moral issue and is it an addiction? But it's both. Part of it is helping people say, it's not healthy. I don't know if I would even say it's moral in the sense of like looking at it as right or wrong. Is like, it's not healthy. I feel alone, isolated, worthless. And then you see something that's gratifying and pleasurable. It's like, well, that's the opposite feeling that I have when I'm in this state, right? And so you see that pattern continue.
really wasn't experiencing any freedom. And I was in a place where I didn't even know what to do. I didn't feel like I could control it. And the more I watched pornography, the deeper that I had to get into watching things that were worse and worse. And when I started doing it, it really began to scare me. And at that point, I didn't even feel like I cared. It was like literally beginning to numb myself to where I couldn't even feel anymore. I began to be more isolated from my husband emotionally. I began to even not want to be around my kids. I don't think that they knew that, but I knew it. And so I knew that this was a really big problem that had really gripped my life. I felt like even my brain needed it. They compare it to pornography addiction to cocaine addiction. It triggers the same pleasure signals that it does for drugs. So physically, even my body felt like I had to have it, or I couldn't calm down.
So there are process addictions and there are substance addictions. Substance addictions are going to be like your alcoholism, your drug addiction, where a process addiction is going to be more your sex addiction, pornography, eating disorders, and such. These are things that you're not necessarily having to take in to change that biochemical state, but there is a dopamine release attached to it.
And so being able to escaping is why a lot of people do that. But what they're escaping from or what they're trying to run from or avoid, I think is undealt with grief or pain. The greatest factor to help people move out of addiction is community or being bonded with other people. It's like, well, I don't want to expose myself. Well, but the thing that you need most beyond just working through understanding the emotional deficit and any trauma or grief is you need other people. Like, you're not going to make it without other people.
It was April 12th. I went to a funeral of a young 20-year-old that had overdosed. Right after the funeral, I went to someone's house, and it was an innocent visit at first, but left on the sink in the bathroom was a pill bottle full of hydrocodone. And then there was only like 2 or 3 pills in there, and I took one. The next day I woke up, it was almost as if the Lord spoke to me audibly. He said, repentance is a gift. He's like, your journey starts today. My executive pastor at the time called an emergency meeting, said you need to come in, and all kinds of emotions are going through. Panic. I had no proof that I was about to be caught, but I was praying that I would actually get caught. And I walked into the office, and my executive pastor and my pastor were there, and I just lost it. And they didn't have to say a word. They're like, we know what you've been doing. I was like, I want freedom. I want out. I need help. And so I confessed everything to them. Meanwhile, my wife has no clue.
And I got a phone call from the senior pastor that said, Brian's fine, but you need to get to the office as soon as you can. And I walked into the office, and the senior pastor was sitting there. And he sat me down and he said, I'm not going to make you wait any longer because Brian's tied up at the moment, but he is addicted to drugs. He called us both into the office with the senior pastor, the associate pastor, and Brian and I. And he couldn't look at me and I couldn't look at him. And there was a heaviness in the room. And I just remember feeling so broken. I felt so blindsided. Being that I work in neonatal intensive care, I see withdrawal signs in babies, but I missed them all in my husband. And I thought to myself, like, how could I be so stupid to miss all these red flags? And as soon as I found out on the way home, all the dots started to connect that I could just see. And I'm like, how could I have missed it? And that was hard.
If you don't know someone struggling with something and all of a sudden that gets exposed, the first thing that I always hear is like, well, he doesn't love me, or there's something wrong with me because he does X. Do I matter? Do they love me? Am I pretty enough? There's a 99% chance that coping mechanism started way before you and this person ever even met each other or got married and started having kids.
I remember just feeling like I was such a disappointment to a man who waited for me. At that point, I did have a female pastor in my life that I immediately confessed to. My husband didn't know, and even though I was being transparent and honest with this pastor, he happened to oversee a Facebook message where I was talking to her about it, and that was the first time that he knew my struggle, and he went through all of those questions, and it was really hard for me. I was the one that did this to him. I didn't even know any women struggling with pornography. Before I found Pure Desire, every ministry I had contacted said, oh, we only help men. And so I felt even more ashamed. And well, I shouldn't struggle with this.
So there's a difference between, sometimes we call it a healthy shame versus a toxic shame. The guilt or the healthy shame is, I did something bad. I know who I am. I'm a good person. And then I didn't act like myself. And I feel badly about that. But with a toxic shame, it says, I'm a bad person. There's something inherently wrong with who I am. I don't belong. People don't want me. And I don't even want myself.
I'm wrestling this whole time with like, how can I be a Christian? How can I be a pastor? How can I do all these things, be all this, and struggle with addiction? And when I walked into rehab, I'm with 17 guys that are struggling with sex addiction, drug addiction, like literally anything that you could think of. They did introductions, and I listened as each guy told their like worst sin and their worst struggle. And I just wept. And I wept because I was in a place where I felt like I could belong. Man, you're struggling with that? Well, here's what I'm struggling with. And it was like a true community where it was authentic. Nobody was hiding. Everything was out in front, and I felt like I could just be whoever I am.
I never told anyone because when I grew up in the church, sex was never spoken of, or if it was, don't do it until you get married. So for me, the shame was so great to even struggle with anything sexual that it literally kept me keeping it secret. I think the shame really started to break for me when I did expose it to another person who accepted me. Not only was the physical beginning to change, but my relationship with God was changing to where I knew that He was there for me in those places where I was being abused. In that moment when those girls were abusing me, I just saw Jesus standing there just crying. The shame really began to shift when I began to truly believe that I was worth Jesus fighting for. And I don't think I struggle with shame really at all anymore. We all fail, and if I fail, big deal. When I used to fail, I used to just beat myself up. And that would just cause me to go to it even more. That's what really happened for me. The shame began to fade away because when I was hurting, I would go to Him instead of something else for comfort.
As someone goes into recovery process, we want them to get into behaviors that are life-giving and set up more of those behaviors than the others, right? So that we have lots of options for exercise, eating right, getting out into nature, being in community, engaging in relationship. In fact, one developmental understanding is that when that is not done for a child, they actually are very susceptible toward addiction because they don't know what does give purpose, what is engaging. Well, I guess video games are, I guess drugs and alcohol, but it never satiates, right? It's only going to progress and it's only going to get worse unless there are some real, truly healthy and life-giving things that are creating that sense of purpose and connection.
There you are.
Is that true, 50%? Is that what they're saying?
Well, what happens is we did a clinical study when we put up a SAS test, sexual addiction screening test. There were 58% of passers were sexual addicts, and 50% of women struggled with it as well. So Heidi's not unusual. So 58% of past sexual addicts, they don't know they are. I think trying hard is going to solve the problem. They promise themselves they'll never do it again, and they'll try it again, and they'll do it again. Because what's driving it is trauma in their life. Unresolved trauma is driving the addiction.
I had never really shared with him deeply about how those events and things affected me. But as we began to go through that process and really work through our relationship, he really began to be a safe place. Not only was I in a Pure Desire group with other women and going through this 10-month counseling process with my husband, that's when I really began to realize, hey, I'm not struggling with these things anymore. Not to say that I'm not tempted, because I still am, but those things just begin to fall away. Be not only intimate with my husband, but with friends. Just really having intimate relationships with people began to really shift all of the addiction.
Where I am now is I'm in a place where I have people in my life that I've allowed into my life to speak into me. If they see blind spots, if they see areas that are concerned, they can actually ask me questions. And even if I lie to them, they're going to know me enough to know if I'm lying to you. And slow.
Through Brian's recovery, he started and opened up his own gym called Cedar Point Fitness and brought the same healing process through rehab and that we had learned as a family into the aspect of his gym.
When I have couples that come in and it's like, hey, you made a mistake, but your life matters, your family matters, you're responsible for them. So the spouse, it's the same thing. It's like, look, this is really hard, but if you'll come in and you'll do the work that you need to do and you'll fight for it, and it's worth fighting for. Like you could tell the story that, hey, we went and we fought for it, right? Like we came through this, and so what does that do? It gives hope to other people. It's like, what story do you want to tell 20 years from now versus what story are you telling now?
When I think about where I am now, and it took a long time for me to get there, I think for the first time in my life ever, I feel free.
And I became so afraid of making mistakes, 'cause one heartful is all that it takes to make you question the man you thought you'd be. I began to question the bright things you see in me. Love is patient, love is kind, love doesn't keep a record of what's
Walking out of rehab, it was just those changes of like what I've missed coupled with the healing that had happened, the freedom that I experienced. It was difficult because I know that my family didn't experience that same thing. I took a plane ride home and I walked in the doors, my kids went nuts. I'll never forget it. Like the moment that I got tackled with my kids, it was it was incredible.
There he is.
It's not something that we've really talked a whole lot about, but we do realize that once they get to the age, it has to be something that we do talk about. And I think just being open and real to them of this is what we went through and this was hard, but through God's grace, and we're on the other side of it.
Thank you. But I'm here to tell you that real healing is possible. I've experienced true change. I've seen God heal my femininity and experience real intimacy with my husband. And I would never change that for the world. All the pain that I went through, I would never change for what deepness of relationship I have now with God and my husband.
It's like when you have somebody tell you your life matters, like no matter what, your life matters. Like we got to find a way to work through this, and I'm here to help you do that. I think that'll rise people up.
The most hopeful thing is that joy connections propagate faster than addiction. And so if we're creating communities of love, communities where people of all various types of experiences, addictions, mental illnesses, etc., are accepted and they have belonging, we actually have more power than the drug dealers or the pornographers or whoever. We have more power to affect change because what we have to offer works a lot better.
The things that we keep hidden cannot be healed unless they're brought to the light. And the truth is what sets you free. And it's what set me free.
Love is patient, love is kind. Love doesn't keep a record of what's behind.